Jeanna Shepard, a photographer and a woman leader here in New Canaan. Thank you so much for being here today as we celebrate 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, giving the women the right to vote. We're going to talk about a lot of different things today, but let's start with your early life. Where did you grow up, and tell me about that?
I grew up in Montclair, New Jersey, and first of all, I want to say thank you for having me today.
You are very welcome.
I'm very honored to be a part of this.
Well, we're so happy to have you.
Series.
Thank you.
I grew up in Montclair, New Jersey, one of 9 children.
Number 8 in the list, right?
Number 8 in the list, yes. And it was a great place to grow up. We had lots of neighborhood. Like every neighborhood had, every family in my neighborhood had at least 5 kids. So it was a very social upbringing in a very different time.
What was it like growing up there, going to high school, and your education there?
So I actually moved to Greenwich and started high school in Greenwich. My whole family moved in 1975, and I went through high school at Greenwich High School. And
then you were off to Georgetown. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
Georgetown was a great place to be. It was when Reagan was inaugurated in 1982. It was a fabulous place to matriculate.
And you were really focusing on writing at that time. Tell me about that, and if there were any professors or mentors that guided you.
So I didn't really know what I was doing. When I first went to Georgetown, it was actually a French major. And then I did have a professor that was encouraging me to continue with my writing. So I changed my major and was hoping to go into a writing career.
What happened? What changed?
Well, it was hard to get a job, and my father was an executive vice president at Hearst Publications, and so I had kind of been around the magazine business my whole life, and so I thought that I wanted to work in that same business. But my father and some of my siblings were in the sales side, in advertising, but I wanted to be an editorial. So I did actually get a job at Condé Nast, not at Hearst, at Vanity Fair magazine.
And who was the editor at the time?
So Tina Brown. Well, actually, when I got there, a gentleman by the name of Leo Lerman was the editor, and it was a much touted magazine. It was, coming back from the 20s, and it was a very literary magazine, and I don't think it was doing that well in that regard. It was very dense. It was very hard to read. It wasn't a hugely popular magazine. So while I was there, after just a couple months, they brought Tina Brown over from the Tatler, and she just had this flair, and she just shook things up, and she was pretty amazing.
What was your role at Vanity Fair?
So I started off as trying to work for an editor, but I got put into the editorial production department, which is where you take all the pieces of the magazine and you put it together and you make it fit. And so that's kind of what I ended up doing, and I kept getting promoted, and so I ended up very quickly being the manager of that department and working with the editors, the art department, the advertising department, the publisher, even the production team downstairs that actually literally put the magazine together.
Can you tell us a little story about what it's like putting together an issue? Who's in the room? What's the conversation? And is it anything like Devil Wears Prada, the movie?
Well, no. I did actually work for Vogue for a couple of days, and it was not my thing. I wasn't happy there.
Yeah.
But no. So what I did was, there's the editorial side and there's the advertising side. And in editorial, you have to put the words together with the art. You have to make sure everything fits. So you're working with the editors and the advertiser and the art department, basically. It's a lot of troubleshooting, and I found that I was really good at that. And I could deal with egos, there's no bigger ego than an art department director. So anyway, I would make everything fit on the editorial side, and then each page, and then I would work with the publisher or the ad director. They would give me the ads, and then I would literally sit down at a table by myself with this gigantic storyboard in front of me and put the ads and the edit next to each other.
It's like putting a puzzle together.
It's like putting a puzzle together.
Are you good at puzzles?
And then, I love doing puzzles. But all of this, I didn't know that this was my thing. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be writing, And I ended up doing this and just loving it, and it was great.
When did you have your aha moment about photography?
I didn't have my moment about photography until after I was raising children. So after Vanity Fair, I moved back out to Greenwich. I had been living in New York for a few years, and I had gotten married, and I started having children, and I gave up the commuting and actually worked for Motley Media, which was then Greenwich Magazine.
Sure.
And tried to stay in there a little bit, but it didn't last.
How did you balance work and family?
I didn't. I decided to give up working altogether. So, but what I did end up doing without even realizing it was using my photography, which I was always with a camera, and I just never really thought of it as a career. But I kept finding myself doing things with photography, and from school sports to family, people would ask me to take their Christmas cards, and so then I started. I got pegged for publicity, so different volunteer organizations, and then the school asked me if I would do their publicity for the different schools would ask me to be their publicity chair, and I took it on. Like, if you give me a job, I'm gonna do it. So I ended up getting in touch with a lot of the teachers and the after school organizers and saying, if you have something you want in the papers, let me know. And I would go cover it. And it became a thing that I just, I was submitting things to both papers, the Advertiser and the New Canaan News at that time.
And you became on the staff of the New Canaan News.
Well, so what happened was I had submitted so many things over the years to both the papers. I realized I should be doing this for a job. I mean,
Might as well get paid.
I need to get paid for this. Yeah. So I started just by asking them if they would give me photo credits, because I had been just considered like a contributor as a photographer. So the Advertiser said, sure, we'll give you a credit, no problem. And then the New Canaan News said, we can't give you a credit unless you work for us. Would you have any interest in working for us?
What was that like?
And it was definitely a challenge. I mean, most everything else was done on my terms, and I was very comfortable. But the editor, Ashley Varese, she really changed my life. She's like, listen, you give us stuff every week. You may as well work for us. So actually then I stopped submitting things. It changed my whole kind of thing with the schools, because then I was just working. I would still submit stuff to the Advertiser, but I was being sent on assignments with the New Canaan News.
You had some women bosses. What was
I've had a lot. I've had all women bosses.
Is that
pretty
right?
much?
How does that work out?
Even now, it's been wonderful. What happened at Vanity Fair was interesting. That Tina Brown and the managing editor and I all got pregnant at the same time, and so the managing editor had just asked me to be the assistant managing editor, which was huge, and I had realized that it was a big decision, but I wanted to be a mother. I didn't want to be commuting to New York and work there. So I made the decision to stop. Of course, Tina and Pam McCarthy, they stayed on. And then it was the editor at New Canaan News that asked me to work for them. And it was the other person in that office was also a woman. And they were just amazingly encouraging, and I've been everywhere in this town. So I worked there for like 8 years maybe, and covered every event in this town. It was so fun to meet the people and go places, and it's very social. Even when you're working, you don't feel like you're working. You really feel like you're a part of something on each assignment, pretty much.
You've lived in New Jersey, Greenwich, New York City. You've worked your way up. Now you're in New Canaan.
I had been looking actually in Westport and Greenwich, and I couldn't find anything for a year. And I came to New Canaan as a recommendation from another realtor, and I found a house in one day, and I loved the quaint feeling of this town. I just immediately felt like this was the place for me.
And your kids grew up here then?
So yes, I have 4 children, and they were all raised and went through all the public school system here.
Fantastic. You have a connection with Martha's Vineyard. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I started going to Martha's Vineyard when my youngest daughter was 2 weeks old in 1996.
Wow, 2 weeks.
And yeah, and just we went up for a couple weeks, and we fell in love with it. We had love with it. We had been trying to find a summer place to go, and we had tried the Hamptons, and we weren't really psyched about that. But we like I loved New Canaan. I got to the Vineyard, and I loved it so much. So we started renting there every year, and actually we rented the same house for 13 years, and in the 13th year we offered a price. We offered to buy it, and so we've been in the same house now, and that was 2010.
And you have a connection with their communication, their paper there.
So yeah, so I started working for the Vineyard Gazette in 2010. So 6 years after I started working for the New Canaan News, and that was also a connection through the New Canaan News, because one of the writers at New Canaan News had spent a summer interning on the Vineyard and worked for the Gazette, and she set me up with the graphics director, and that was instant too. Like, I sent him an email, and the next thing you knew, I was going off on assignments, and it's been a steady course.
What are some of those assignments? Obviously, it's a little different than New Canaan and the schools and the kids and so on. You're in sort of a vacation mode.
Yeah, so historically, over the years, it's been, the summer is bustling.
Yes.
You know, it goes from a population of 20,000 off season to 120,000 on season.
Wow.
And that's when all the events happen. That's when the agricultural fair happens. That's when Illumination Night happens. So it's been wild. Like, I'm on all kinds of events. But there's also really a cast of characters on the Vineyard that come from off island, and also that live there. Amazing artists. A lot of people from the film industry come and have houses on the Vineyard. Musicians. So I'm so grateful that I get to meet all these people. My assignments are to go take portraits of them and sit through interviews with them, and it's
in your bio that as I was preparing for meeting you, you talk about shooting the news. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think that before I started working for New Canaan News, I was doing a lot of family photography and things that were important to individual families and people, but there's a whole nother element when you're shooting the news, and it's a lot about timing and a lot about trying to portray the person or event that you're shooting into, like, kind of being a vehicle, a reflection of that, so that people can see it. But what makes photography interesting, and all the arts really, is they're seeing it through my eyes. So to me, I find almost every assignment a challenge, because I want there to be something different in what people are seeing, not just what you think you see. You're not just watching a parade. You're watching a child holding a flag with, I don't know, watery eyes or whatever. It's the news.
Is there any story you can tell us that sort of overwhelmed you or really made you be so happy that you are a photojournalist?
There's so many instances like that. One of the most moving things I've recently photographed was Juneteenth, and that was on the Vineyard, and it was very powerful to be in the front of crowds walking up this bridge, and people holding posters and honking, and the emotion was high, and then we all settled in this famous park, landmark park in Oak Bluffs, and they had lots of speakers. And I have to say, one of the most powerful things for me was that most of the organizers were women, and I loved seeing that, and young women, and of all races and ethnicity and age. And it kind of blew me away, because everyone was coming together for this cause, and it was very emotional.
We're here to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, the right for women to vote. What was your first time voting?
Oh, honestly, I don't really remember my first time going to the ballot. It had to have been in Greenwich when I was 18.
Mm-hmm. If you were growing up back 100 years ago, or even before that, when the struggle really began, mm-hmm. do you think you'd be part of that movement?
I hope I would be. It's so important, and I see it's so relevant today, even 100, 200 years later than when it all started. And I'm actually amazed by our youth. I would hope that if I were that age in that time, that I would be upfront with that as well.
What do you think women struggle with these days? Is there hope for the future that things will get better?
I think women have been struggling for a long time, and I think they've had a long way to go. It's been going on for 100 years, and really the equal rights started 200 years ago. And just because it was passed in 1920, it's kind of hard to believe that 100 years later we're still at a point where there is not equal pay.
We're still talking about it.
There's not equity in general.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm hopeful that it is changing, I think, a little quicker now. But I did learn in reading about the 19th Amendment that, even though it was passed in 1920, it took another over 60 years for the last state to ratify it, which was in 1984 mm-hmm. in Mississippi. Mm-hmm. That, I can't even believe that.
All right, a few fun questions.
Sure.
What is your favorite tradition that you get involved with in New Canaan?
Well, there's so many events here that I've covered. I have to say, one of my favorite, well, I have two favorites. One is the St. Mark's Fair, of course. That's always fun. I always loved covering that. But the other place in New Canaan that moves me the most is the Glass House. And one of my favorite assignments when I was working for the news was the Dine and Design that they had every year, which has become their annual picnic. And from those two assignments there, where I spent all day, the Krista Carr, who's the developmental production, program director, I guess, mm-hmm. she has hired me a number of times because of that to go in and do their community days. There was a time that I was working for them. They had like a nighttime series with different artists, and it was a small group, and we would walk around the Glass House and then go over to the sculpture gallery, painting gallery, and that was really an amazing thing. And since then I've been still doing their community day up until last year when I wasn't here.
You've taken 1 million photographs. Is something from the Glass House one of your favorites?
Oh, I have so many favorites from the Glass House.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other subject matter?
Oh, I love Waveney.
Mm-hmm.
Waveney, I think every photographer loves Waveney. Every photographer loves the Glass House. Every photographer loves Grace Farms. And Irwin Park is beautiful, and Mead Park, in all seasons. All these parks are, they evoke emotion when you walk through them.
Jeanna, what restaurant do you like in New Canaan?
Well, I'm very partial to Elm.
Why is that?
A few reasons. One is the food is delicious.
It's my favorite.
And I do know the owners, and Laura and John Barker. And also, there was a time where they had my artwork up in there. They refurbished the interior, and they had my photos up there for a year. Did
you like going into the restaurant and sitting amongst your art?
Oh, it was fun.
Yeah.
It was very fun.
That's cool.
Yeah.
You're involved with a program called Circle of Care. Tell me a little bit about that.
Circle of Care, I came across Circle of Care because I had been doing a lot of volunteering in town. And it was all publicity. And I was looking for something that had a little more, something that was going to move me. And a friend of mine had just worked on a gala for Circle of Care, which had, at that point, was a new organization, nonprofit, that was developed by 3 women who had children that went through cancer. And when they were young and scared, it's as you can imagine, it's an awful process. One of the founders was from New Canaan, actually. and the other two were from Wilton. And I had approached them to work with them and do maybe their publicity. So I quickly became their publicity chair and worked for them for like maybe 5 years. And it was during a time of change for me in general with photography, and I was suddenly like overwhelmed, like covering all the events and everything and curtailing each event to each town and delivering the news to different editors it kind of became a little overwhelming, and I did still have 4 kids at home. So anyway, before I resigned from the board, I had wanted to do this portrait project. I wanted to photograph the children on their day of treatment. The reason why I started the whole thing is because I had gone to the Tully Center one day and I saw all those portraits of the women who had survived and not survived breast cancer. And I just remember walking through the whole thing and just being heart-wrenched by each of them, but also inspired by them. So I kind of wanted to do that same thing for these children. I wanted people to see these children in a light maybe that they had never seen before, because children, even though they're suffering through cancer, they're still children. They still have the essence.
They're very
of
resilient
children.
too.
Yes, they are essence. They are resilient, but the essence of them in general, and capturing them in front of a camera, you see so much more. You just see so much more. And how they interact with some of the family members that came into the portrait. So I would go to Yale New Haven for 3 days in a row on the days of treatment and bring my backdrop and lights and in a very small corner of the waiting room, and any child and family that wanted to participate could. And it's very emotional, but it's also so rewarding. I can't even tell you, when I first started doing it, I was so worried that these families weren't going to want pictures of their kids when they were maybe bald or going through all of this. But it's been the complete opposite. They have loved these photos, and Circle of Care means so much to me. And the founders, Liz Salguero and Dawn Leidenheim, are so supportive of what I do. And they put together this team of writers that, instead of doing bullet points of what the child went through, there's just like a little saying or a paragraph about that child, something special that came out in their interview with the child that brings so much to my portrait. And it's been one of the most amazing things of my life.
Jeanna Shepard, photographer and woman leader here in New Canaan, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I enjoyed talking with you.
You too. Thank you.
you.